This video is sponsored by Squarespace, the best way to make an amazing website. Hey guys, it's Max. In front of me, I have two excellent laptops. I have the 2020 13-inch MacBook Pro. This is the 4 Thunderbolt port model. And I also have the 2020 Dell XPS 9300. Dell made a ton of improvements with this machine. And today we not only are going to be comparing things like the CPU and graphics performance, we're also going to talk about keyboards, trackpads, displays, webcams, certain extra features that Dell offers that make it really compelling. And I have to say that if you're trying to decide between these two, there's never been a more difficult choice, but at the end, we are gonna help you guys decide. So let's go ahead and start out with the exteriors of these devices. If I pull up this display, you guys could see that the Dell's is shorter, and that is because Dell has this beautiful thin bezel. It is so slim on the sides, on the top as well, even though they're packing in more hardware up over here, where Apple, they didn't change the design. We didn't get a 14-inch, unfortunately. It looks identical, not bad at all, but it does look dated compared to the Dell. Now, if I go ahead and fold these, I'm gonna stack them up on top of each other. You guys can see that the Dell is not as wide, not as long. The MacBook Pro is quite a bit bigger. The thicknesses are similar and the weight is fairly similar. The Dell is a little bit lighter, but not by that much. And the Dell also has a different shape. The MacBook Pro is quite boxy, whereas Dell uses more of a slate shape, just like the MacBook Air. Now, you guys might also notice that the Dell has one port over here and a micro SD card slot. I'm glad they added that in. Apple, if you don't want to do full size, please. I know you're not gonna do it, but it would be great. Apple has two Thunderbolt 3 ports on the side here. And if we flip to the other side, as I mentioned, this is the 4 Thunderbolt port model. So you have 4 full-speed Thunderbolt 3 ports, where Dell only offers you 2. Now, if you buy the base MacBook Pro, it does also have 2. But if you spend the extra money to get a higher config, it's nice to have those extra ports in case you want to hook up to more displays, docks, accessories, where Dell, you only get 1. Now, if we take a look at the bottom, Apple has these long cutouts over here that allows air to get sucked in. Dell also has some, and they made some changes for 2020. They made the edge get curved more, so there's less chance of this being blocked. And Dell has some speakers right here as well. They're bottom firing. And then another set of air intakes right over here. These can get blocked if it's on your lap, or even worse on a blanket, say something like that, where there's not as much risk of that with the MacBook Pro. And overall, if I'm just gonna talk about the build quality, Dell is just as good as Apple, or very close. They really stepped it up. This is all aluminum now instead of having plastic sandwiched in between. You guys can see right here. It's all milled out. It feels excellent. It is super rigid. Even if we open it up, there's very little display flex, chassis flex. They are keeping up with Apple. Apple does feel a bit more premium because it is all aluminum. You don't have any soft touch over here. So it feels a little bit nicer, more premium, whereas the Dell, it has rubber. Now here's another difference as I open this up. You guys might just notice that it logged me in automatically, and that is because this has Windows Hello built in. There's extra sensors, just like on your iPhone with Face ID, that projects little dots. It reads it, it's fairly secure, and it's really, really quick. I love that. I wish Apple added that, but they didn't. So we'll get back to webcams and the quality in just a bit. But taking a look at the design here, the Dell's just much more compact. And even though this soft touch doesn't feel as premium, it is more comfortable, it doesn't get as cold, but it does pick up fingerprints and grease a little bit easier than the Mac. Now, even though Dell gave us that Windows Hello facial authentication, they still included a fingerprint scanner that's built into the button, just like Apple. With Apple, you just have that Touch ID. We also have some differences above on the sides. The MacBook Pro has this touch bar. The custom shortcuts that show up here will change depending on what application you have open. You can customize them a bit. Now, as far as the keyboards, Apple finally upgraded. They got rid of the butterfly keys. The new Magic Keyboard has more travel. It feels a lot nicer, and it's also going to be more reliable. It's a great keyboard. And Dell also upgraded their keyboard. They added more key travel. They made it feel better. Honestly, I can't tell you which one is which. They both are excellent, and I don't think anybody's going to complain about these keyboards. They are fantastic. Now let's look a little bit lower and compare the trackpads. The Dell's is a little bit smaller, but it's not small. It's a standard trackpad, but they did improve it compared to last year. And even though it is a diving board design, you could still click fairly high, and it is really good. It's one of the best Windows trackpads. They did a great job, but Apple's is better. It is larger, it is all glass, and it uses magnets, so it feels the same no matter where you click. It is an amazing trackpad, definitely better than the Dell's. And now let's look a little bit higher and compare the displays. Apple makes it easy. There's only one display option, no matter even if you're getting the base one. It is their Retina display, just over 4 million pixels. It looks nice and sharp, whereas with Dell, you have 4 options. The base is a 1080p, spend another $100, you get a 1080p touchscreen, spend more, you get a 4K, and the highest end one, the one I have, is a 4K display. It is touchscreen. Dell's 4K definitely looks more detailed than Apple's 2.6K or so, because this has over 9 million pixels compared to 4 million pixels. It looks sharper, and Dell also allows this display to show HDR. So with this particular video, I'm getting a lot more pop in the snow. It looks fantastic, it looks sharper, but that doesn't tell the whole story. Now, both of these displays are actually 500 nits of brightness. Apple just doesn't think that's enough brightness to do great HDR, so they don't enable it. Apple does have better coatings for their display, so I'm seeing less reflectivity, which is nice. Dell stepped it up for this year, but it's still not as good. And we do have a difference in color accuracy. Dell screens can display 100% sRGB color accuracy, which is good enough for most people. But all of Apple's screens, even the base MacBook Pro, can display DCI P3 colors. And if you guys see this little logo right here, we're just seeing one solid color on the Dell, whereas with the MacBook Pro, we're seeing this logo on the inside, because that shade cannot be displayed on Dell's display. Now, along with the displays, there's one other important thing that needs to be paired with it to give you a good experience, and that is the speakers. But before we compare the speakers, let me give a shout out to the sponsor of this video, Squarespace. If you've been thinking about making your own website, now is the perfect time, and Squarespace is seriously the best way to go. You can build a great looking website like we did with literally no web making experience. It doesn't matter if you want a portfolio, a blog, e-commerce, or anything else. You just choose a template and customize blocks of text and images. It's incredibly simple, affordable, and ours have been running flawlessly for over 2 years now, bringing in new clients thanks to its built-in SEO tools. Start your free 2-week trial with no credit card required by going to squarespace.com/maxtech or by using the custom link down below. And when you're ready to launch, you'll save 10% off your first purchase of a website or a domain. Now it is time to compare the speakers. Make sure you guys go get your best pair of headphones. And before we start, I want to say that last year, this test was an embarrassment to the XPS. The previous XPS used 1 watt speakers, one on each side, and it seems like they listened, because this year each speaker gets 2.5 watts. That's a big, big improvement. But let's see if it can compare to the MacBook Pro. All right, guys, let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below. I'll give you guys my opinion because I'm hearing him live without YouTube compression and all of that. Well, the Dell improved a lot compared to last year, but it is still not a competition. The MacBook Pro actually peaked about 4 decibels higher based off of my Apple Watch. And in general, it's probably 2 to 3 decibels louder. I want to note that this is the 4 Thunderbolt port model. If you get the base model MacBook Pro, it doesn't have the built-in woofers, so it doesn't sound as good, but it still sounds slightly better than the Dell XPS. If you guys watched our previous comparison, with the extra woofers and all the tuning, it allows the other speakers to play back better, and it sounds better in every way. The bass sounds better, the mid sound better, the highs are more clear, and it's louder overall. I will say most people will be happy with the Dell XPS. It's not like it's bad like it used to be. It's on average or maybe a little bit better, but Apple just did a fantastic job with these higher end 13-inch MacBook Pros. Both of these laptops feature 720p webcams. This is what you get as far as video quality and microphone quality from the 2020 MacBook Pro. And this is the webcam and microphone quality of the 2020 Dell XPS. You guys let me know any differences that you notice and which one looks and sounds better. Let me know down in the comment section below. One thing I can tell right away is that the XPS, the webcam is much, much wider. You guys can see that. That may or may not be a good thing depending on how clean your room is and stuff like that. And now let's get into performance. We're gonna start off testing the SSDs. Both of these do have 512 gig SSDs. I have AJA opened up here since it works on both Mac and Windows. Let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so very interesting. As far as the write speeds, they're basically identical, just over 2300. And as far as read, we have 2400 MacBook Pro and 2563, slightly faster with the XPS. Both of these are super fast. You won't notice a difference, but there is one difference you will notice, especially down the line, and that's the fact that the XPS allows you to upgrade your SSD later. But with Apple, whatever you buy out of the gate is exactly what you're gonna be stuck with. And now let's compare the CPU and the graphics performance. I opened up Geekbench 5, and now's a good time to mention that both of these have 16 gigs of RAM. Now, both of these do have Intel's 10th generation chips, but we have a couple differences. For $1,800, Apple actually gives you an i5 processor, whereas Dell gives you an i7. The clock speeds, though, are different. This i7 is at 1.5 gigahertz base, where this i5 is at 2.0. Intel is starting to make this stuff really confusing. So we're gonna see what happens in the real world. So if we take a look here, we have our best performance mode set. You don't have that option on the MacBook Pro. Very interesting, we're about 3/4 of the way done. And I hear the XPS, the fans kicked up. Not super loud, but you hear them, whereas the MacBook Pro is still silent. The Dell finished the test first, and the Mac just spun up its fans at the very end, and it also finished up. Here we have it. Wow, that is incredibly close. 1,227 compared to 1,267, but that is within margin of error. On multi-core, 4408 versus 4489, also within margin of error. You'll get bigger fluctuations than those differences if you just run, one test and then do another test. So i5 versus i7, but the results are practically the same. I'm gonna go ahead and start our OpenCL test, and I wanna say that both of these laptops have G7 graphics. Even though this is the i7, this is an i5, Apple actually went with the i5 that's paired with the fastest graphics, so they should be very similar. Now, if you get the cheaper base $1,300 MacBook Pro, that actually comes with an 8th gen Intel CPU, where the single core performance is gonna be roughly 25-30% worse than the i5 that's cheaper for the XPS. That's a big difference. Multi-core differences aren't as big, but also the graphics, we have a difference. So you no longer have Intel's latest graphics, and the Dell will actually come with G1 graphics, the weakest of the latest. So with the Dell, you absolutely want to go for the i7 if you can afford it. So as for now, bam, the Dell just got done, 10,800. That's actually the highest score I've seen the Dell get. Okay, and that's a very low OpenCL score comparatively. So we have 8,353 compared to 10,800. That's probably about a 20-25% difference in performance. Now, with the MacBook Pro, if you're running Metal, you're gonna get over 10,000 as well. I think our last test was 10,400. Most Apple apps, Mac apps, they're using Metal now. It's a lot more efficient, and you're gonna get better performance there because it's tuned for that. Let's go ahead and open up Unigine Heaven. It's a gaming test, and see how they compare. So it's been running for a few minutes here, and I definitely noticed a couple of things. The MacBook Pro is running silent. It ran really silent for a while. Once it's heated up, now it's at 2,600 RPM. The Dell, I don't know what the RPMs are, but it definitely is much louder, not obnoxiously loud, but you definitely hear it. The GPU is at 73 degrees Celsius, whereas the Mac's temperature readout's at 72. Similar temps, but the Mac is running quieter. Looks like we're almost done with the test. The MacBook Pro only got up to 3,000 RPMs, whereas the XPS constantly had that kind of low noise, but it wasn't obnoxious or anything like that. And as far as the results, 13.7 FPS compared to 13.5. Extremely close. Now I also want to point out that if you're buying the base MacBook Pro, it actually has one fan instead of the dual fans that's inside of this model. And in that case, it will run louder, more similar to like what the XPS is running right now. Now, before we go into our last test, before we start talking about prices and the verdict, I want to mention that I noticed the difference here. The keys on the XPS are definitely hotter on both sides over here compared to the MacBook Pro. You still feel some heat here, but it definitely feels cooler than the XPS. And the XPS's fan, it's been about 2 minutes since the last test, it's still running and trying to get it even cooler. And even with those fans constantly running, we're at 53 degrees Celsius, 54, whereas our MacBook Pro shut the fans off a couple minutes ago. It's running at 48. Right now, we're gonna use Cinebench R20. It's very interesting because both these have 10th gen now, so it's finally more comparable. Let's go ahead and run Cinebench R20. I'm gonna be keeping an eye out on Intel Power Gadget. And right off the bat, we just hit 39 watts. The Dell hit 43 watts. Dell is pushing a lot of power. The Mac will get the same score if it's unplugged. The Dell usually won't give it as much wattage as high as it does when it's plugged in. As far as the frequencies, both at 3 gigahertz. So that looks pretty comparable. This is 100 degrees Celsius and the Mac is at 100 degrees Celsius. Both get hot very fast, and that's because the companies want the max performance out of these. They're pushing a ton of wattage. These chips are rated at 15, but they can be pushed 25 or higher. At this point, we're at 26 watts. Dell is down to 24, 99 degrees, 97 degrees, very similar. Before, the fans would ramp up all the time and it would slow itself down to get it to run cooler. Now, it's running at 90, 97, 98 degrees Celsius. Dell is not caring as much about allowing it to run hot. They're trying to maximize performance just like Apple does. At this point, we're about halfway done or a little bit more. Both are running at 99, 98 degrees. We're running at 2.6 gigahertz here compared to 2.9 and 3.0 right there. Once the fans kick up, it starts pushing more wattage to it, more electricity. And the Dell definitely kicked up its fans earlier than the Mac. At this point, they're about the same. Both get about the similar loudness if you keep pushing the CPUs. But the Mac will try to keep that 3 gigahertz compared to running at 2.6. And we have our results here, and wow, okay, so we have 1616 on the Dell XPS, roughly around what we've got in our previous tests and comparisons, whereas the Mac has 1911. That is close to 20% higher performance. That is really impressive, and this just proves that the whole i5 and i7 thing, they don't really matter. And before we talk about prices, where it gets a little bit weird, let's talk about battery life. Now with the MacBook Pro, I get 7 to 8 hours of battery life. I expect this new one to be similar. Now with the Dell XPS, it gets a little tricky because if you buy the lower end model with a 1080p screen that doesn't look as good as the MacBook Pro, remember MacBook Pro has 4 million pixels, the 1080p will have a little bit more than 2 million pixels. That will actually get about 9 to 10 hours of battery life for mixed use. That is excellent. But if you want to enjoy the gorgeous 4K display that I have here, that drops you down to 5 to 6 hours of mixed use at about 350 nits of brightness. And now let's talk about the prices. I'm going to start with a comparison of the exact specs that I have here, and then we'll talk about a lower end, a less expensive option. So for once, with Apple upgrading the SSD and giving you 16 gigs of RAM, this is actually cheaper. The MacBook Pro comes in at $1,800 with the i5 CPU, 512 SSD, 16 gigs of RAM. Whereas the XPS, it's running at $1,900 with that 4K display. Now, if you don't want the 4K display, it'll be less expensive, but we're comparing kind of quality more similar here. Now, I have to mention that Dell's prices move around quite a bit, but it gets a little bit more interesting when we go down and say we want to add 32 gigs of RAM, which you can on both these machines. That costs $400 on the MacBook Pro, and with Dell, it costs $150, less than half the price. And if you want to get a 1 terabyte SSD, that costs $100 on the Dell, costs $200 on the Mac. And if you want to get 2 terabytes, costs $300 on the Dell, $600 on the Mac. And keep in mind, you can actually upgrade your SSD yourself. So upgrades from this point are cheaper on the Dell. And now let's compare the base models. Apple's base MacBook Pro comes in at $1,300 compared to Dell's at $1,200. They're both i5 processors, and the Dell actually has G1 graphics, and the MacBook Pro, if you buy that base one, it's using 8th generation chips, but the performance is actually very similar when we're comparing graphics and CPUs. even though the MacBook Pro uses older chips. Now, the Dell is $100 less expensive, but that includes that 1080p display. You can spend another $100 if you want a touchscreen 1080p, and if you want a 4K display, it's a $300 upgrade. If you guys want 16 gigs of RAM, thankfully Apple now is only charging $100 instead of the previous $200, same as Dell, but upgrading to a 512 costs you $200 on the Mac, costs you $50 on the Dell, and you can upgrade it yourself later. So on the lower end model, the Dell is more competitive, but keep in mind the display is a lot worse. If you care about that type of stuff, if you want to be doing photo editing, video editing, it's nice to have a sharp display. And now for the verdict, which one should you spend your money on? Well, right off the bat, some people love macOS, and that's going to bring them to the MacBook Pro. You can't get macOS on the XPS, but you can install Windows easily on the MacBook Pro. And if we're comparing the base models without any upgrades, for $100 more with the MacBook Pro, you're gonna have a great system. You're gonna have enough storage for most people. It's gonna be quieter. The speakers are better. The trackpad is better. The display is a lot better than the 1080p panel on the Dell. It's gonna run quieter. And on top of that, you're gonna have much better resale value as well. So I think if you just want a base system, the MacBook Pro is a no-brainer. The Dell definitely has its upsides too. I love the look. I love how sleek it is. I love the changes they made. I love the Windows Hello. That's not enough to bring me to buying the Dell. Now on the higher end, when you're comparing the models I have here, the MacBook Pro with 10th gen is excellent, even with the i5. Speakers are way better. It is quieter at the same time. Once again, resale value, all those things come in. It's a great deal. Now, if you're somebody that is gonna be upgrading to 32 gigs of RAM, upgrading to a terabyte, you're gonna have a big difference in the price of the systems. Much less expensive to keep upgrading the Dell. In that case, if you like the sleek design, I think a lot of people will also be happy with the Dell if they don't need Mac OS. And Dell has never made a laptop this good, and this is my favorite Windows laptop right now. We're gonna have a review coming out soon. Make sure you guys click that circle above to subscribe. So if some of these features and things that the Dell offers are attractive to you, you don't care about macOS, pick it up. You're gonna be very happy with it. We have some great videos over there if you guys wanna watch them. This has been Max, and I'll see you in the next video.